Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Zabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Alright children, today we're going to be continuing our story through the book of Esther, and today we're going to be focusing on the events of Mordecai and Haman. So Esther had now become the queen of Persia. And the whole time that she was in the harem, getting beautified before she married the king, and even after she became the queen, Mordecai, her uncle, to find out what was happening with Esther, used to come and sit in the king's gate. Now, some people think that Mordecai may have had a job as an official. Others think he was just sitting there like a homeless man. The reason Mordecai went to the king's gate is that was essentially where all the news happened, and so he could find out what was happening with the queen in the palace. And one day, as Mordecai was sitting in the gate, he overheard two eunuchs, two of the king's officials, talking together, plotting how they were going to assassinate and kill the king. And so Mordecai sent word to Queen Esther, and Esther then passed on the message to the king. And when the king found out that these two officials were going to kill him, he sent the soldiers out, arrested them, and had them killed instead. And the Bible mentions that this event was recorded in the Chronicles of the Medes and the Persians, so kind of like a royal records, a royal report type of book, but that Mordecai at that point in time never received any reward for what he did. Now, at the same time, there was a naughty man named Haman. And the Bible refers to Haman as an Agagite, a descendant of Agag. Well, back in the book of Samuel, when Saul was made king over Israel, God commanded Saul to go and kill all the Amalekites. And Saul had failed to kill all the Amalekites, particularly he left the king, King Agag, alive. And so it is believed that Haman was descended from King Agag of the Amalekites, who were enemies of the Jewish people. And Mordecai also happens to be descended from the tribe of Benjamin, from the same lineage as King Saul. One of Mordecai's ancestors was the brother of King Saul. So Haman was descended from the Amalekites, the enemies of the Jews, and Mordecai was descended from the people of King Saul, who failed to kill the enemies of the Jews. And the story goes that Haman was appointed to be the second in command of the Empire of Persia. And he was a very proud and arrogant man and very boastful, because he was now like the prime minister of Persia. And he was so happy, except when he walked out on the street, he noticed that Mordecai refused to bow to him. All the other people in the city would bow down to Haman, but Mordecai refused. Now, the Bible doesn't necessarily say why Mordecai didn't bow down. Possibly because Mordecai knew that Haman was an Agagite and didn't want to bow to his enemy. Or just possibly that Mordecai would only bow down to the king himself and wouldn't bow down to any lower official. Since the story of Esther focuses on this theme of being respectful and submissive versus those who are disrespectful and arrogant, it's very likely that people didn't have to bow down to Haman. They only had to bow to the king, but that Haman thought of himself so highly that he expected that everyone should bow down to him as well. And so since Haman was not the king, Mordecai refused because he didn't have to. But that made Haman very angry. And Haman went home and he cast lots every day for almost a year. Now, lots is kind of like rolling dice, and it was generally used by pagans as a form of divination, as kind of fortune telling. So Haman went every day and cast lots, and for day after day for almost a year, the lots came up negative. But then eventually he cast lots and they came up positive on the 14th day of the 12th month. And so Haman decided that on the 14th day of the 12th month would be the day for him to destroy the Jews. Because Haman wasn't just cranky at Mordecai, he was mad at all the Jews, and so he desired to kill every Jew in the Persian Empire. And so Haman went off to the king, and he said, "King, there's this certain type of people group in your empire, and they follow strange laws, and they don't follow your rules, and we need to kill every single one of them." And so Haman never actually told King Ahasuerus that he wanted to kill the Jews. He just told the king, he says, there's this bunch of naughty people in the empire, and we need to kill them off. And so the king said, "Okay, well, you're my second in command, and I trust you if you think this is the right thing to do. Here, take my signet ring, go and make a decree and send letters throughout the entire empire telling everybody that we're going to, kill this particular people group." And so Haman went and he wrote a letter saying that on the 14th day of the 12th month that there was a decree made by the king that everyone in Persia should take up arms and should attack and kill the Jews. And the letter went throughout the empire. And all the Jews throughout the empire read the letter and they were grieved. And they put on sackcloth and ash and they mourned and repented. And Mordecai in the city of Susa was greatly grieved, and he put on sackcloth and ash and he mourned for the people of Israel. Now, children, if we were to continue following this story in the book of Esther chronologically, we would now come into the events of Queen Esther's feast. However, this video is particularly focused on the relationship between Haman and Mordecai. And so for this video, we're going to skip over the feast of Esther, and we're going to discuss them in more detail in our next video. So Mordecai had sent a message to Esther and asked her to save the Jews. And Esther had gone to the king and she was planning to save the Jews, but first she wanted to make sure the king was in a good mood and know that he loved her and trusted her. And so she first asked to have a feast. And so she asked the king to come with Haman and for the three of them to have a big feast. And so they had a big feast, and then she said to the king, "Can we have another feast the next night?" And the king agreed. And Haman, going home from the first feast, saw Mordecai, and he was enraged at Mordecai, and Mordecai still refused to bow to him. So he went home, and he grizzled and he grumped to his wife and his friends and his sons, and he complained about that he was second in command of all of Persia, and he alone was special enough to come to the feast of the king and the queen. And yet, Mordecai still refused to bow down to him. And so, his wife and his friends suggested that since Haman was second in command of Persia, he could pretty much do whatever he liked, and so he should build a giant gallows, and he should go to the king and request that Mordecai be hung on the gallows and killed. And Haman was pleased by this, and so he ran off to the palace to go see the king and have this happen. But it just so happened that the king was in his bed at night and he couldn't get to sleep, and he was tossing and turning, and so he sat up and he called for one of his officials to come in and to bring him the Chronicles of the Medes and the Persians. And so these were a royal report, and he asked, "Can you please just read these boring reports to me until I fall asleep?" And so the king lay down, and the man began to read. And he came to the part where it mentioned that Mordecai had saved the king's life from the two eunuchs who were planning to kill the king. And the king sat up and he said, just hold on a moment there. So this man saved my life. Yes, your king, he did. And it doesn't mention it there in the reports. What reward did we give him for saving my life? And the official said, well, actually, your majesty, we never gave Mordecai any reward for saving your life. And the king thought, what? That's disgraceful. No. We're going to fix this right now. We're going to bring Mordecai in and we're going to do something to thank him for saving my life. I mean, he saved the king's life. We're going to give him something. And he said to the official, can you go out into the courtyard and see if any of my royal advisors or officials or noblemen are out there who can give me some advice on, how we should reward Mordecai? And so the official went and he looked at it and he says, your majesty, I see Haman down there in the courtyard. He's just come running in right now. I think he wants to talk to you anyway, so how about we call him in? And so Haman came running in, and he came, and the king said, now Haman, I want your advice. There's this certain man, and I want to thank him for doing something very special, and I want to give him a very special reward. So, what do you think I should do? And Haman, being so prideful and arrogant, didn't think that the king meant somebody else. Instead, Haman thought, I'm second in command of the empire. I'm the king's favourite. I got to go to the king and queen's feast. Who else but me would he want to honour? And so he said, king, this person, whoever he may be, if he was going to be rewarded in some way, I think what you should do is you should get, one of your horses, a horse that you yourself had ridden on, and you should put on it the king's crown, and you should take this particular man, wink, wink, I think we both know who this man is, and you should dress him up in some royal robes and put a crown on his head, and then you should parade him throughout the streets, and you should have one of your other officials walk before him telling everybody how wonderful he is. And Haman thought that this reward was going to be for him, and the king said, that's a brilliant idea, Haman. In fact, I want you to go right now and grab Mordecai the Jew, dress him in royal robes, put him on one of my horses, put a crown on the horse's head, and I want you, Haman, to parade him throughout the streets telling everyone how wonderful he is. And Haman would have been just like, what? He thought he was going to get praised, and instead now Haman's got to praise Mordecai, who he hated. And so Haman had to put Mordecai on one of the king's horses, and had to dress Mordecai up in royal robes, and then had to parade him around the streets, and Haman had to go in front of Mordecai going, everybody look at Mordecai, isn't he great and wonderful? Look what happens to those whom the kings love and respect. Everybody adore and praise Mordecai. And they went through the streets and all the crowds cheered, woo! Yay, Mordecai! You're the best, Mordecai! And that made Haman even crankier and more mad at Mordecai. And that night, Haman came home very embarrassed and very cranky and grumpy and upset. And his wife and his friends and his sons warned him. They said, look, if this Mordecai is of the Jewish people, you better be careful, Haman, because there seems to be somebody looking after Mordecai and keeping him safe, and if you continue to go against him, that's going to be to your downfall. And so the book of Esther never actually mentions the name of God. And of course, the Persians, who are pagans, would not have mentioned the name of the God of the Jews, but they recognized that there was some divine force that was looking after Mordecai. And so they warned Haman that if he was going to continue to attack and fight against Mordecai, that Haman was probably going to end up killed. But Haman was arrogant, Haman was prideful, and he refused to listen, And so he continued his plan to try and kill Mordecai and all the Jews. And we're going to discuss how that turned out for Haman in our next video, where we talk about Esther saving the Jewish people. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.